Chapter 1: The Open Road. The road wound northward through the foothills, a ribbon of pale dust cutting through wild meadows and low pines. The air was clear and sharp after the springs, cool enough that breath lingered in faint clouds when the wind shifted. Kaelen walked ahead, broad shoulders swaying beneath his pack, while Priscilla skipped at his side, humming tunelessly and stopping every few steps to crouch over wildflowers or shiny stones. A few paces behind, Izzi and Sirius kept a slower rhythm. The sound of their boots mingled with the quiet rustle of grass. Izzi absently toyed with the silver cuff on her ear, the twin to the one she'd once seen gleam in Lysandra's ear, her fingers tracing the etched curve again and again. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wanted to be broken. She glanced at Priscilla ahead, the dragon in human skin twirling a stalk of wheat like a wand, her laughter carried back on the breeze. "I know she's a dragon and all," Izzi finally said, her tone light but thoughtful. "But I still get nervous for her when things turn rough." Sirius's brow twitched. "Because she clings to arms instead of drawing blades?" Izzi huffed a quiet laugh. "That's one way to put it. She's timid by nature, sure," he said, eyes on the horizon. "But when push comes to shove, she can buckle down and turn a battlefield into ash. Remember when you saw her the first time? How calm she was, prancing over the slaver before setting him ablaze? The fire in her isn't gone, it's just restrained." Sirius's gaze softened. "I'm her anchor of sorts. Keeps her from losing herself when the heat rises." Izzi smirked, half to herself. "True. I suppose she doesn't need protection after all." They walked a few more paces in silence. The wind caught Izzi's hair, tossing a few copper strands across her face. Her hand dropped from her ear, brushing against the small scar at the corner of her lip. "She's lucky," Izzi said quietly, "to have someone like you, someone who steadies her." Sirius glanced at her, puzzled but didn't press. Izzi's gaze lingered on Kaelen's back ahead of them. She thought of Celine's fire, of the way her breath used to seize in her throat when that cruel voice whispered her name, of Kaelen's hand on her shoulder, always there, solid as stone. Her anchor. She smiled faintly. "Everyone needs someone who keeps them from falling apart." Sirius's reply was soft, almost lost to the wind. "Some more than others." The road stretched onward, the mountains just a smudge of blue on the far horizon. The air smelled of pine and sun-warmed dust, and for a while, neither of them spoke again. Sirius's gaze drifted forward to where Kaelen and Priscilla walked. The orc's stride was steady and patient, while Priscilla flitted at his side, pointing at things with childlike enthusiasm, a hawk circling above, a patch of silver moss, a crooked fence post shaped like a heart. Sirius reached into his coat pocket, drawing out a small silver flask. The motion was subtle, practiced, like the 100 times before. He uncorked it with a quiet click, brought it briefly to his lips, and took a slow drink. Izzi's ears twitched at the sound. Her eyes narrowed with faint curiosity, and she arched a brow. "You're always sneaking sips of that stuff," she said, half teasing. "What is it you're drinking all the time? Must be good, you seem to always have some on you." He lowered the flask, turning it in his hand before answering. "Rum." "Rum, huh?" she said, pretending to sound unimpressed. "Haven't had a good drink in a while." She held out her hand expectantly, eyes bright with challenge. "Let me taste it." Sirius hesitated, the faintest crease forming between his brows. The request seemed to catch him off guard, not for what it was, but because it came from her. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then, wordlessly, he held out the flask. Izzi grinned. "Thanks." She took it without ceremony and tipped it back for a generous sip. The burn hit instantly, hot, sharp, and smoky. Her eyes went wide and she swallowed hard, then coughed violently. Sirius's lips twitched, not quite a laugh, but amusement flickered there all the same. Up ahead, Kaelen glanced over his shoulder. "Everything all right back there?" Izzi raised a shaky thumbs up between coughs. Just great," she rasped, blinking through watery eyes. Priscilla turned at the sound, her expression unimpressed. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing at Sirius like a scolding sister. "Sirius," she said under her breath. Sirius recorked the flask and slipped it back into his coat, unconcerned. She asked. Priscilla huffed, flicking her braid over her shoulder as she turned back toward Kaelen. "Impossible," she muttered. Izzi wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, still smirking. "Worth it," she said, her voice rough but triumphant. Sirius gave her a sidelong look, faintly amused. You didn't vomit. I'd call that a success. The road stretched on beneath the bright midday sun, the laughter fading into the breeze as they walked. The day stretched long and unhurried, the road ahead unfurled like a ribbon of pale stone through the hills, winding between tall grasses that whispered in the wind. The mountains were distant, yet hazy blue shapes half swallowed by clouds, and the land between here and there seemed endless. Birds wheeled lazily overhead, their calls echoing faintly across the open fields. Every so often they passed an old milestone, half-buried and worn smooth by time, or the remains of a way station, a crumbled arch, ivy curling through its bones. The world felt vast and quiet, the kind of silence that swallowed thoughts whole. There was beauty in it, even if the path itself held little promise beyond the next bend. Up ahead, Kaelen walked with his usual steady stride, boots crunching softly on the gravel. Priscilla danced rather than walked, weaving from one side of the road to the other, humming a tune that didn't seem to have an end or beginning. Her braids swayed behind her like a crimson ribbon catching the light. Kaelen found himself watching her, not in fascination exactly, but in that quiet disbelief reserved for people who seemed untouched by the weight of the world. She was carefree in a way he couldn't quite understand. She felt his stare, then suddenly turned mid-step, raised both hands like claws, and opened her mouth wide. Rah! Kaelen froze. His eyes went wide, and he instinctively stumbled a step back, clutching his chest. By the gods, he started, half growl, half laugh. Priscilla burst into delighted laughter, her cheeks pink from the effort. Kaelen exhaled, muttering something that sounded suspiciously like a curse. You nearly took a year off my life. Still giggling, she skipped ahead. Kaelen shook his head, grumbling under his breath, though a faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Behind them, Izzy's quiet laugh carried on the breeze, and even Sirius allowed himself a small, hidden smirk as the long road rolled ever onward beneath their feet. Izzi and Sirius eventually caught up, the crunch of their boots mingling with the fading sound of Priscilla's laughter up ahead. Kaelen was still muttering under his breath, rubbing the spot on his chest where he'd clutched his heart. His scowl deepened more from embarrassment than anger. Izzy's grin was immediate. You? Scared of her? I thought orcs didn't flinch at anything smaller than a warhammer. Kaelen shot her a look. She's not exactly small. Well, not really. Sirius brushed past, giving Kaelen's shoulder a light slap as he passed. Get a grip, man. Izzy laughed harder, doubling down. Careful, Kaelen. She might war again if you're not paying attention. Kaelen groaned, dragging a hand down his face. When exactly did my position in this group get turned upside down? Sirius smirked over his shoulder. About the time she started breathing fire. That earned a quiet chuckle from Izzy, and even Kaelen couldn't help but shake his head, grinning despite himself. Ahead, Priscilla had skipped a good distance farther down the path, her braid catching the evening light. Sirius lifted a hand and called out to her, his voice carrying easily across the empty road. Priscilla! Enough wandering, we'll find a clearing off the road and make camp before nightfall. She paused mid-step, gave a quick nod without a word, and moved toward the tree line to scout for a spot. The sun hung low now, painting the horizon in soft amber. The group's laughter faded into the steady rhythm of their footsteps, the promise of rest just ahead. The road curved away into the trees, and the group veered off where the grass grew high and the earth dipped into a small hollow beside a stream. The clearing was quiet and open enough to see the road through the branches, but far enough to keep them hidden from passing eyes. The sun was sinking low now, a red-gold haze stretching through the canopy. Izzy dropped her pack first and began laying out the bedrolls, humming softly as she shook the dust from the worn canvas. Kaelen was a few paces away, crouched near a half-dug pit lined with stones. He struck flint against steel, sparks jumping uselessly into the cool evening air. Come on, he muttered under his breath, adjusting the kindling again. Priscilla, who had been quietly stacking their packs against a fallen log, glanced over. After a moment's hesitation, she brushed the dirt from her skirt and crossed the clearing. She crouched beside him, watching for a few seconds with an expression caught somewhere between curiosity and amusement. Kaelen looked up mid-strike. Yes? Priscilla only smiled faintly, the kind that curved her lips without showing teeth. She turned toward the pit, leaned close, and with a quiet breath, released a short, controlled puff of flame. The wood caught instantly, flaring bright and warm. Kaelen blinked, sitting back on his heels, the light reflecting off his tusks. Right? He said, nodding in impressed approval. That works. Fire, Priscilla said simply, still smiling. Kaelen let out a low chuckle. "Thanks." She gave a small nod and retreated to her place by the log, drawing her knees to her chest and watching the fire grow. A few steps beyond the edge of the clearing, Sirius leaned against a tree, eyes scanning the woods. His posture was relaxed, but his hand rested lightly on the hilt of one of his blades. The orange glow from the new fire flickered against his coat, casting long shadows across his face. From his vantage point, he could see them all. Izzi spreading blankets beside the fire, Kaelen testing the heat of the flames, and Priscilla sitting quietly, her face soft in the firelight. For a brief moment, the scene almost looked like something out of an old memory, a fragile piece carved out of the wild. Kaelen rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small bundle of vegetables wrapped in cloth, a few potatoes, onions, and some wilted greens that had survived the road. He set to chopping them with his dagger on a flat stone, tossing the pieces into a small tin pot as the fire crackled to life. "Not much," he muttered, "but it'll keep us from starving." Sirius, still standing at the edge of the clearing, straightened. "I'll see what I can find nearby, something with meat, if luck's kind." Izzi glanced up from her bedrolls, eyebrow raised. "You hunt too?" He shrugged once. "I do a lot." Before he could take a step into the trees, Priscilla quietly rose and moved to his side. She didn't say a word, just fell into step with him, her eyes following the tree line. Sirius gave her a single look, brief but understanding, and together they disappeared into the woods. The clearing grew quieter once they were gone, the only sound the soft hiss of the fire and Kaelen's knife against stone. Izzi sat cross-legged near him, arms draped over her knees, watching him work. "You know," she said after a while, her voice light, "despite everything, it's nice, having company for a change." Kaelen grunted in agreement, stirring the pot with a stick. "Aye, beats sleeping with one eye open," she smiled faintly. "Still feels strange sometimes. Being this," she gestured loosely at the small camp. "Normal." Kaelen smirked, glancing over. "Normal? You? The woman who picks fights with sorceresses and drinks half a flask of rum in one go?" "Fair," she admitted, chuckling softly. "Still," she sighed, leaning back on her hands, eyes on the fire. "I need some." Kaelen barked out a laugh, nearly dropping the stick. "Ha! Been a while, huh?" Izzi shot him a mock glare. Sure," he said, grinning wide. "Avaran, was it? Or maybe Horian at Cerulea's Rest?" Her ears flicked sharply. "Nothing happened with Horian." "Didn't say it did." Izzi smirked, tossing a pebble at him. "You're impossible." Kaelen caught it mid-air, laughing low in his throat. The sound was warm and real, one of the few times she'd heard it outside of battle. For a moment, they both just watched the fire, comfortable in the silence it offered. Kaelen's eyes drifted toward the tree line where Sirius and Priscilla had vanished. When he looked back at Izzi, he caught the faintest trace of her gaze doing the same. The direction, the lingering softness there. He said nothing, just stirred the pot again, his grin fading into something knowing, something almost protective. Before long, the brush rustled. Sirius emerged with a pair of rabbits hanging from one hand, Priscilla close behind, her cheeks flushed from the cool night air. "Dinner," Sirius said simply. Kaelen rose to meet him, nodding appreciatively. "Good work. I was starting to think we'd be chewing bark." Sirius handed over the catch without comment, his green eyes flicking briefly toward Izzi before he went to clean his blades at the stream. Izzi watched him go, her smirk returning, faint, thoughtful, and just a little guilty. Kaelen set his tools beside the fire, a whetstone, his hunting knife, and a small bundle of cloth he used for dressing game. He crouched down and laid the 2 rabbits on a flat stone, the soft light from the flames catching the pale shimmer of his tusks. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost reverent. "Best not to waste anything," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. With practiced ease, he drew the blade down the first rabbit's belly. The knife moved cleanly, parting fur and skin with quiet precision. He peeled back the hide in smooth, sure motions, folding it neatly aside before working the blade along the bone. The smell of fresh game mingled with the faint scent of smoke. Izzi and Sirius sat across from him, the firelight flickering between them. Izzi rested her chin on her knees, watching Kaelen's hands with idle curiosity. Sirius leaned back against a fallen log, silent as always, but his eyes were fixed on the work, assessing, perhaps appreciating the precision. Once Kaelen finished cleaning both rabbits, he rinsed them with a splash of water from his flask, wiped his hands on a rag, and began cutting the meat into sections. His motions were careful but efficient, each cut clean and sure. He worked in silence until a soft sound broke it, a faint, curious hum from behind him. Priscilla had stepped closer, head tilted, her eyes following the knife's movements. She crouched beside him, her long braid brushing her shoulder as she leaned in to watch. Kaelen glanced sideways, surprised but not unkind. "You want to learn?" Priscilla hesitated, glancing from him to the meat, then gave a small, uncertain nod. He smiled slightly, setting down the knife for a moment. "All right. It's simple once you know the rhythm. You don't rush it, you just follow the shape nature already gave it." She nodded again, eyes fixed on his hands as he picked up the knife and began to show her. "Start here," he said, guiding the blade along a joint. "See? Bone tells you where to cut. You listen to it." Priscilla's gaze followed every movement, silent and intent. She didn't speak, but her focus was absolute. Kaelen spoke quietly as he worked, explaining the angle of the blade, the feel of resistance, the difference between cutting too deep and not enough. Once the pieces were ready, he set a small pan over the fire, laid the meat in, and sprinkled in a pinch of salt and herbs from his pouch. The sizzling smell drifted through the camp, rich and earthy. Priscilla stayed crouched beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes bright in the firelight. Every so often, she'd glance up at Kaelen, as if to silently ask what came next. He'd gesture or explain in short, simple instructions, his voice steady and patient. Across the fire, Izzi smiled faintly. "Didn't think I'd ever see you giving cooking lessons." Kaelen grunted, poking at the pan. "Didn't think I'd ever have a student." Sirius's lip twitched, a smile. Izzi laughed softly, and Priscilla's mouth curved just a little, not quite a smile, but close. She turned back to the pan, eyes following the flicker of flame as if committing every detail to memory. The fire crackled, shadows danced across their faces, and for a brief while the world beyond the clearing, the long road, the looming mountains, the hunters in the dark, felt far away. Night had settled fully over the clearing by the time the meat was cooked. The forest had gone quiet save for the hum of insects and the soft crackle of the fire. Shadows of the trees stretched long and deep, broken only by the flickering glow that ringed the camp in warmth. Kaelen gave the pan one last turn, nodding to himself in approval. "All right," he said, his deep voice steady but softened by the hour. "Dinner's ready." He portioned the rabbit and vegetables carefully, dividing them into tin bowls from his pack. When he finished, he turned to Priscilla, who still sat near the fire, watching the embers dance. "Chef," he said with a grin, holding out two of the bowls. "Take these to our fearless wanderers, will you?" She blinked, startled by the title, but accepted the bowls with delicate hands. Rising to her feet, she moved quietly across the clearing, her steps almost soundless in the grass. She reached Sirius first. He was still sitting near the tree line, one knee drawn up, eyes on the dark woods beyond the camp. She knelt beside him, holding out the food without a word. Sirius looked over, meeting her gaze briefly. He nodded once. "Thanks, Pris." Priscilla gave a small nod in return before moving toward Izzi. Izzi accepted her bowl with a smile. "Thanks, Priscilla. Smells good." Priscilla's lips curved faintly, a ghost of pride, and she returned to the fire where Kaelen was already filling the last two bowls. "Here," Kaelen said, handing her one. "You helped. That earns you a bit extra." He winked, the firelight glinting off his tusks. Her eyes lit, glowing faintly gold in the dark. Without a word, she threw her arms around him in a quick, impulsive hug. Kaelen froze mid-motion, nearly spilling both bowls. "Careful," he barked, though his tone carried more surprise than anger. He handed her the bowl with exaggerated caution. "You nearly lost your share before tasting it." Priscilla's laughter was quiet, soft enough that it almost vanished under the crackle of the fire. She retreated to her place by the log, sitting cross-legged and eating in slow, content bites. Sirius eventually joined the circle, setting his flask aside for once. "Good meal," he said simply, raising his bowl slightly toward Kaelen. Kaelen nodded. "You found the game. Credits shared." Izzi leaned back on her elbows, smiling lazily at the two of them. "Your cooking hasn't diminished in the slightest," she said. Kaelen grunted. "Still alive, aren't you?" "Barely," she teased. The group fell into an easy quiet after that, the kind that comes only when the stomach's full and the night's kind. The fire's glow painted them all in shades of amber and gold. Sirius half lost in shadow, Priscilla's eyes reflecting the light like twin embers, Izzi resting with a faint smile, and Kaelen tending the flames with his steady hand. The fire had burned down to a steady glow, its embers pulsing softly in the dark. Crickets had taken up their quiet chorus beyond the clearing, and the cool night air carried the faint scent of pine and smoke. Kaelen stretched with a low groan, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm spent," he said, rising to his feet. "Wake me if something decides to eat us." "Wouldn't dream of it," Izzi murmured. He snorted, stepping away from the fire and toward his bedroll. Within moments, the steady sound of his breathing joined the hum of the night. Priscilla gave a long, cat-like stretch, her arms arching above her head before she burrowed into her bedroll. She had tucked herself close to Sirius's, close enough that the edge of her blanket brushed his boot. Within minutes, her breathing had slowed, soft and even. Izzy pulled her own blanket around her shoulders and sank back against her pack, but sleep wouldn't come. The stars above were sharp and clear, and her mind refused to still. Every rustle in the dark set her ears twitching. Every snap from the fire reminded her she was awake when she shouldn't be. Across the clearing, Sirius was still sitting upright near the tree line, half in shadow. He'd said earlier he'd keep watch for a while, and true to his word, he hadn't moved from his post. The faint orange light caught the edge of his jaw, the glint of metal in his hands. After what felt like an hour, Izzy sighed and slipped quietly from her bedroll. She moved carefully, avoiding the creak of her leathers and the shifting of the fire's coals, until she stepped past Kaelen's sleeping form and into the cool grass beyond. As she drew closer, she saw it. His hand, the bandaged one, clenched tight around a dagger. The blade tip dragged lightly across his palm, tracing slow, deliberate lines. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be blood glinting there. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Sirius?" He startled just slightly, enough to show he hadn't expected anyone awake. His head turned toward her, and in a single smooth motion, he closed his fist, wiped the dagger clean against his boot, and sheathed it. "Just sharpening my blades," he said evenly. Izzy frowned faintly but didn't press. "Didn't look like that." He didn't answer right away, just looked at her in that quiet, unreadable way of his, green eyes catching the faint glow of the coals. Finally, he said, "You should be asleep." She shrugged, drawing her cloak tighter around herself. "Couldn't. Thought maybe you could use some company." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. He shifted slightly to one side, wordlessly leaving space for her beside him. Izzy stepped closer, the grass cool beneath her bare feet, and settled down beside him at the edge of the firelight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night hummed softly around them, distant wind, the faint bubbling of the stream, the crackle of dying embers. Sirius reached for the flask lying in the grass beside him. The metal caught the starlight as he uncorked it, taking a small sip before lowering it again. Izzy glanced over, the corner of her mouth quirking. "For someone who always looks half asleep, you'd think you'd actually sleep more." That earned a faint sound, not quite a laugh, but close. He turned the flask in his hand, then offered it to her. "Small sips this time." She took it carefully, her fingers brushing his as she lifted it. "Noted," she said, and raised it to her lips. The rum burned her throat, but she managed this time. No coughing fit, no sputtering. She swallowed, exhaling softly, eyes never leaving his. They sat in silence for a heartbeat. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the smell of grass and distant water. The stars hung heavy above them, so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Izzy shifted slightly, her voice lowering. "Your hand. Is it okay?" Sirius looked down, following her gaze to his bandaged hand. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, without hesitation, he opened his palm and turned it toward her. "See? Fine." The skin was unbroken, smooth under the dim light, no blood, no marks. Izzy blinked, frowning faintly. She could have sworn she'd seen him cutting into it. "Maybe I'm seeing things," she murmured. "Don't worry," he said quietly. She looked up, confused, but his expression gave nothing away. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind stirring through the leaves. Sirius leaned back against the log, eyes tracing the stars as if searching for something. "I feel like I wanted to ask you something," Izzy said softly, almost to herself. "But I can't for the life of me remember what." He was silent for a while, as if weighing the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant, something rare for him. "Yes," he said. "Back when you were injured, you said you remembered me." Izzy's head turned toward him, her brow furrowing. Sirius's gaze met hers. "You were right. You do." He hesitated just a breath before continuing. "I was there. At your exile. In Valoran." The words landed like a spark in her chest. Izzy's breath caught. Her eyes widened as memory flooded back, flashes of that hall, the crowd of elves, the heavy silence before the sentence was spoken. The faces blurred by tears and shame, but one face, his, at the edge of the gathering, sharp and watchful even then. Her lips parted, the flask forgotten in her hand. "You," she started, her voice breaking on the word. He didn't move, didn't look away, only the faintest flicker of guilt passed behind his eyes. The night held its breath around them. Sirius watched her reaction carefully, the flash of recognition in her eyes, the way her breath caught on unfinished words. For a moment, she looked ready to ask a dozen questions all at once, but none came. He reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture from him, steady and grounding. "Relax," he said quietly. Izzy blinked, forcing herself to breathe. The contact, brief as it was, pulled her from the flood of memory. She tried to chase the fragments of that day, faces, names, voices, but it all dissolved into fog the harder she reached for it. "I can't remember much else," she murmured. Sirius exhaled slowly, leaning back against the log again. "There's not much to remember," he said, voice low. "I only happened to be there with my mother. Nothing more, nothing less. I was saying goodbye to her." Izzy frowned, her brows knitting. His mother? That wasn't what she'd expected. Valoran was known for its rigid bloodlines, an elven city obsessed with purity and heritage. Even being half-human was enough to draw scorn, sometimes exile. "But," she began, uncertainty in her voice, "Valoran doesn't allow—" "I know what you're thinking," Sirius interrupted softly. He lifted the flask again, taking a small sip before continuing. "And you're right. No one was ever particularly fond of me there." He turned the flask idly in his hands, the firelight flickering against the silver. "But my mother, Morgana." Izzy straightened sharply, cutting him off. "Lady Morgana was your mother?" He glanced at her, the faintest trace of surprise crossing his face at her tone. Izzy's voice dropped to a whisper. "She was one of the High Council, one of the oldest elves in Valoran. Everyone knew her name." Sirius nodded once. "Yes, that's her." He stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, his voice quiet, almost reverent. And despite everything Valoran demanded of her, she fell in love with a human. Izzy stared at him, unable to find her words. It was a thought that would have been unthinkable in Valoran, a scandal buried so deep that only whispers would dare carry it. Sirius gave a faint, humorless smile. "I was the result of that mistake. And when she died..." His voice faltered for the briefest second, then steadied. "There wasn't much reason for me to stay. I only came back for the burial." The fire crackled between them, a low hiss filling the silence. Izzy's gaze softened as she watched him, the pieces of his quiet reserve finally making sense, the way he carried himself on the edges of things, never quite belonging anywhere. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The night breeze swept gently through the clearing, stirring the embers, and for a moment the two of them sat there in perfect stillness, two exiles beneath the same stars, bound by scars from the same city that had cast them out. Izzy sat quietly for a while, eyes tracing the dance of firelight against the trees. Then, without a word, she reached out toward him, fingers brushing the air in a silent request. Sirius watched her for a beat before passing her the flask. Their fingers met briefly again, warm skin against calloused, and he let her take it. "Your trial," he said after a pause, voice low and thoughtful, "happened to be the same morning as my mother's ceremonies." He gave a dry half-smile. "Some crime to be held before a glorious send-off." Izzy turned her head sharply and jabbed her elbow into his ribs. "You think I actually did it?" He grunted softly, rubbing his side but smirking all the same. "No," he said, looking her up and down. "But Valoran was never much for truth-seeking, were they?" Izzy's expression shifted, the sharpness fading to something softer, sadder. She looked away, her voice dropping to a murmur. "Changed everything for me." She lifted the flask then, taking a long, unrestrained swig, far more than a sip. Sirius didn't stop her. The rum burned down her throat, heavy and warm, and she coughed once before exhaling, cheeks already flushing pink in the firelight. He watched her with quiet amusement. "Easy," he said, not unkindly. "You'll drink yourself blind before the stars fade." Izzy lowered the flask, eyes unfocused but steady. "Maybe that wouldn't be so bad." Sirius gave a quiet hum, leaning back against the log again, his gaze turning upward toward the stars. "We can talk more about it next time," he said after a moment. "If you want to open old wounds." She turned to glance at him, his profile dark against the flickering light, calm but not distant. "But for now," he continued softly, "we should just enjoy the chill night while it lasts." Izzy nodded faintly, her expression easing. She tucked her legs under herself, sitting closer to the fire, her hair catching the glow like copper threads. Sirius reached forward, pulled another small branch onto the embers, and the flames flared quietly between them. Neither spoke again, the forest whispered around them, the fire crackling softly.
Thank you for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe. More chapters are on the way.